The deafening silence that followed still haunts me to this day. One moment, the entire Galactic Council chamber was filled with mocking laughter, thousands of alien representatives finding endless amusement in humanity's supposed primitive technology. The next moment, when Captain Sarah Chen activated our vessel's dimensional core, you could hear a pin drop across all 7 dimensions of space. I remember standing there on the presentation platform, my hands trembling slightly as I watched their smug expressions melt into shock. As Earth's chief engineer on the project, I had spent 15 years of my life working on what they called impossible technology. 15 years of being told humans were too young, too inexperienced to grasp the complexities of dimensional engineering. They said our brains weren't evolved enough to comprehend travel beyond the standard 4 dimensions. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed our vessel, the HSS Breakthrough, as it effortlessly phased through what the Galactic Council had claimed was an impenetrable dimensional barrier, the same barrier they used to keep humanity contained within our local cluster of stars. For our own protection, they said, more like for their convenience. Those condescending smiles disappeared when they saw our ship's energy readings. The quantum sensors they had insisted on using to monitor our test flight were showing power levels that shouldn't have been possible for a primitive species like us. I couldn't help but feel a hint of satisfaction as I watched the Council's lead scientist, a towering crystalline being, frantically checking and rechecking the data. "Impossible," he whispered, his crystalline form flickering with distress patterns. "Your species has barely mastered fusion power. This technology requires understanding of quantum fold mechanics and hyperdimensional mathematics." I finished for him, allowing myself a small smile. Turns out human intuition and creativity count for something after all. The council chamber erupted in nervous murmurs. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. Humanity's survival depended on this moment. With the Nexus swarm approaching from the galactic core, we needed access to higher dimensional travel to have any hope of evacuating Earth if things went wrong. The Council had repeatedly denied us this technology, claiming we weren't ready, so we built it ourselves. Captain Chen's voice crackled through the chamber's communication system. "Dimensional fold complete. All systems nominal. We are now operating in 7th dimensional space." I locked eyes with the council leader, an ancient being who had dismissed my previous presentations with casual waves of his upper appendages. "Still think we're too primitive to join your defense fleet." The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. Humanity had just proven we could not only grasp 7th dimensional physics, but also engineer working technology around it. Technology that could potentially turn the tide against the approaching swarm. But before the council leader could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. The holographic display flickered, showing something massive emerging from dimensional space near the Breakthrough's position. Something that shouldn't have been there. Captain Chen's voice came through again, this time tense with urgency. "Control, we're picking up an anomaly. It's like nothing we've ever seen. The 7th dimension is..." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static. As the council chamber erupted in chaos, I stared at the last image from our sensors, my blood running cold. In pushing the boundaries of dimensional travel, had we accidentally attracted something's attention? Something that had been waiting in those higher dimensions all along. The laughter had stopped, but I had a feeling this was just the beginning. I watched in horror as the holographic display showed a rippling distortion spreading outward from the Breakthrough's position. It wasn't just a simple dimensional anomaly. The very fabric of space-time seemed to be unraveling around our ship. The crystalline scientist's surface had gone completely dark, a sign of extreme distress in his species. "Get them out of there," I shouted, rushing to the control terminal. My fingers flew across the holographic interface, trying to establish a connection with the Breakthrough. 15 years of work, and more importantly, my best friend was on that ship. Sarah and I had started this project together in a garage on Earth, fueled by nothing but determination and too much coffee. Now she was facing something unknown, something that even the Galactic Council seemed afraid of. The council leader had risen from his seat, all 4 of his eyes fixed on the spreading distortion. "We warned you," he said, but there was no smugness in his voice now, only fear. "There are reasons we kept the higher dimensions restricted. Things exist in those layers of reality that your species cannot comprehend." With all due respect, I shot back, not taking my eyes off the readouts. "Maybe if you'd shared that information instead of treating us like children, we could have been better prepared." The emergency quantum beacon from the breakthrough was still transmitting, but the data made no sense. It showed the ship simultaneously existing in multiple dimensional states, something that should have torn it apart instantly. Yet it was still there. A junior council member, her bioluminescent tentacles pulsing with anxiety, spoke up. "The readings, they matched the precursor archives. The great vanishing of the Third Age." She fell silent as the council leader shot her a warning glance, but it was too late. "The precursors?" I turned from the console. "You mean the species that disappeared 50,000 years ago? What do they have to do with this?" Years of classified files and restricted access suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. The council hadn't just been patronizing us. They had been hiding something. The holographic display flickered again, and this time Sarah's voice came through, distorted but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "Control, you need to see this. We're not alone up here. The seventh dimension. It's not empty. There are structures, technology. It's like an entire civilization existing just slightly out of phase with our reality. And they've noticed us." The chamber's lighting dimmed as something began affecting the station's power grid. The council leader moved to terminate the transmission, but I was faster, locking the communications open with an encryption algorithm we had developed just for this situation. Sarah's next words came through clearly, despite the growing interference. "The precursors didn't vanish. They ascended. And now I think they want to talk." The holographic display showed the breakthrough, now surrounded by what looked like geometric patterns folding in on themselves, shapes that hurt to look at, that shouldn't have been possible in any dimension we understood. But instead of attacking, these impossible constructs were forming what appeared to be a corridor in spacetime, leading deeper into the seventh dimension. "Captain Chen," the council leader's voice was urgent now, "do not proceed further. You don't understand what you're dealing with." There was a long pause before Sarah responded, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the same smile she had worn when we first sketched out our dimensional drive design on a napkin in that garage so many years ago. "No, we don't understand. But isn't that exactly why we have to go?" The last thing we saw before the transmission cut out was the breakthrough moving forward into the geometric corridor, carrying humanity's first ambassador into a realm where our greatest dreams, or nightmares, awaited. The next 3 minutes were pure chaos in the council chamber. Warning systems blared as the dimensional corridor's energy signature began affecting nearby space. I watched as the geometric patterns surrounding the breakthrough started replicating themselves, creating a complex web of impossible mathematics made visible. The precursors were studying something. The junior council member blurted out, her tentacles now a pale white of fear. Something beyond even their understanding. That's why they moved their entire civilization into the higher dimensions. They found a pattern in the universe that shouldn't exist. Before the council leader could silence her again, the station shook violently. The holographic display exploded with data as sensors detected massive energy waves rippling out from the breakthrough's position. These weren't just normal dimensional distortions. They were carrying information. Complex, encoded patterns that made our most advanced quantum computers look like ancient calculators. "Sarah," I called through the comm link, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Whatever you're seeing up there, we're detecting some kind of transmission. The energy patterns, they're like nothing we've ever recorded." Her response came through broken and distorted. "You should see this, old friend. It's beautiful. The precursors, they weren't running away. They were trying to warn us. The pattern they found, it's alive. The higher dimensions aren't just empty space. They're like a neural network, spanning the entire universe." The council leader's upper appendages trembled as he approached the display. "We thought we were protecting you," he whispered. "We've spent millennia trying to decode the precursor warnings. Their last message spoke of a choice, a moment when younger species would have to decide whether to remain in the lower dimensions or face something they called the universal consciousness. Another violent tremor rocked the station. The geometric patterns around the breakthrough were now pulsing with what looked like synaptic energy, firing in sequences that somehow felt familiar, almost biological. The ship itself seemed to be changing, its hull resonating with the same patterns. The Nexus swarm, Sarah's voice came through clearer now, filled with a mix of awe and urgency. It's not an invasion force. It's an immune response. The universal consciousness. It thinks our dimension-piercing technology is an infection. But the precursors found a way to communicate with it, to prove we're not a threat. We just need to. The transmission cut off as a blinding light filled the chamber. The geometric patterns had begun converging on the breakthrough, but instead of destroying the ship, they were integrating with it. Through the chaos, I could see Sarah at the helm, her hand steady on the controls as reality itself seemed to bend around her. No, the council leader's voice was barely a whisper. She's attempting to interface directly with the consciousness. The precursors spent generations preparing for this. A single human mind can't possibly. But he was wrong. We had always been wrong about humanity's limitations. As I watched the energy readings spike to impossible levels, I realized what Sarah was about to attempt. She wasn't just going to communicate with this higher dimensional intelligence. She was going to offer it something the precursors never could. A new perspective. A human perspective. The last thing I saw before the light became unbearable was the breakthrough's dimensional core powering up beyond anything we had designed it for. Sarah was going to use our ship, our impossible, human-made ship, to do something even the precursors hadn't dared. And in that moment, as reality itself held its breath, I finally understood why the Galactic Council had really been so afraid of us all along. The blinding light subsided just enough for us to see what was happening to the breakthrough. The ship's hull had become translucent, pulsing with intricate patterns that mirrored the geometric structures surrounding it. But something was wrong. The energy signatures weren't stabilizing as they should have been. Instead, they were growing exponentially, threatening to tear open a permanent rift between dimensions. "Sarah, abort the interface," I shouted into the comm, but her response wasn't what any of us expected. "The consciousness, it's showing me something." Her voice came through, unnaturally calm despite the chaos. The precursors were right about the pattern, but wrong about its purpose. It's not just a neural network. It's a bridge. Remnants of civilizations that came before, billions of years of collected knowledge. And it's dying. The council chamber erupted in gasps as new data flooded our screens. The geometric patterns weren't just communication attempts. They were a desperate plea for help. The higher dimensions were collapsing, folding in on themselves like a dying star. "Impossible," the crystalline scientist muttered, his surface rippling with confusion patterns. "The higher dimensions are fundamental to the universe's structure. They can't just." "They can if something's consuming them," Sarah interrupted. "The consciousness isn't an immune system. It's the last defense against something else. Something that feeds on dimensional energy itself. The Nexus swarm isn't coming to attack us. It's running from something worse." As if responding to her words, the holographic display showed new signatures emerging from the depths of seventh-dimensional space. Dark, angular shapes that seemed to absorb the geometric patterns around them. Where these shapes passed, the higher dimensions simply ceased to exist, leaving dead spots in reality itself. "The dimensional devourers," the junior council member whispered, her tentacles now completely white. "The original warning in the precursor archives. We translated it wrong. They weren't warning us about the consciousness. They were warning us about what it was fighting." Sarah's voice came through again, stronger now. "The consciousness didn't reach out to us because we broke through the dimensional barriers. It reached out because we did it differently. Our technology, it doesn't just pierce dimensions, it bridges them. We didn't know it, but we've been accidentally creating dimensional anchors, points where reality can't be consumed." The dark shapes were getting closer to the breakthrough, but the ship's dimensional core was still pulsing, creating new patterns that seemed to strengthen the fabric of spacetime around it. The council leader stood frozen, all four eyes fixed on readings that shouldn't have been possible. "Your species," he said slowly, "you don't just think outside the box. You refuse to acknowledge the box exists at all. That's why the consciousness chose this moment to reveal itself. That's why." He never finished. The station's sensors screamed as multiple dimensional rifts began opening throughout the sector. Through each one, we could see ships emerging, vessels of the Nexus swarm, but not as we had imagined them. They weren't invaders. They were refugees carrying the last survivors of countless civilizations that had already fallen to the Devourers. And at the center of it all was the breakthrough, its hull now completely transformed by the consciousness's touch. Sarah's next words made my blood run cold. "They don't just need our help. They need our imagination. The Devourers can predict and counter any logical defense, but they've never faced human ingenuity before. And I think I just figured out how to give them one hell of a surprise." The dimensional core began to pulse in a new pattern, one that didn't match any known laws of physics. Sarah was about to try something that even the consciousness hadn't considered, and I had a feeling the universe was about to learn why you should never underestimate human creativity when backed into a corner. The breakthrough's dimensional core pulsed with an intensity that made the station's sensors go dark. Sarah had done something unprecedented. She wasn't just connecting dimensions, she was weaving them together like threads in a tapestry. The geometric patterns around the ship began to change, forming what looked like a three-dimensional mandala of pure energy. The Devourers feed on dimensional energy. Sarah's voice rang through the chamber, now harmonizing strangely with frequencies we couldn't quite hear. But they can only process one-dimensional frequency at a time. So what happens if we give them all frequencies simultaneously? The council leader's eyes widened in understanding. "You're creating a dimensional overflow cascade, but the energy requirements would be impossible?" I couldn't help but smile. That's humanity's specialty. The dark shapes of the Devourers converged on the breakthrough, drawn to the massive energy signature, but instead of consuming the dimensional energy, they began to flicker and distort. Sarah had turned our ship into a dimensional prism, splitting and recombining dimensional frequencies faster than the Devourers could adapt. "The consciousness is helping me stabilize the pattern," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the strain. "We're creating a new type of space, a dimensional alloy. They can't consume it because it doesn't exist as a single state. It's everything at once." The refugee ships from the Nexus swarm began to align themselves with the breakthrough's energy pattern, their own systems resonating with our technology. The consciousness had shared our solution with them instantly, and now thousands of ships were amplifying the effect, creating a growing web of stabilized space-time. But the Devourers weren't finished. They began to merge, forming a singular entity that towered over our combined fleet, a last-ditch effort to overwhelm our defense through sheer power. The chamber filled with the sound of groaning metal as the station's structural integrity began to fail under the dimensional stress. That's when Sarah played her final card. "You know what the best part about human imagination is." Her voice was almost playful now. "We don't just think outside the box. Sometimes we turn the box inside out." The breakthrough's core inverted its energy flow, and suddenly the massive geometric mandala wasn't just a shield. It was a lens, focusing all that dimensional energy back onto the merged Devourers, but not to destroy them, to transmute them. "Everything in the universe wants to exist," Sarah explained as the massive dark shape began to transform. "Even dimensional parasites. We just needed to show them there's another way." The merged Devourer entity writhed as the energy reshaped it, its structure shifting from something that consumed dimensions to something that could inhabit them stably. The consciousness's patterns merged with it, not fighting but teaching, showing it how to be part of the dimensional fabric instead of feeding on it. When the light finally faded, we saw something beautiful. The Devourers had become living dimensional anchors, their very existence now helping to stabilize the higher dimensions they once sought to consume. The breakthrough floated at the center of it all, its hull shimmering with patterns that would rewrite our understanding of physics. "That's impossible," the crystalline scientist whispered. "You didn't just defeat them. You converted them." But Sarah had one last surprise for us. As the breakthrough's sensors came back online, they revealed something hidden behind the dimensional frequencies we've been working with. A signal, ancient but persistent, carrying a message that made the council leader sink back into his seat in shock. The precursors hadn't ascended or vanished. They had become the consciousness itself, merged with the higher dimensions to serve as guardians until a species came along that could think of a solution they never imagined. They'd been watching, waiting for someone impossible enough to try the unthinkable. They'd been waiting for humanity all along. And as I looked at the transformed devourers now helping to stabilize the dimensional barriers, I couldn't help but laugh. Sometimes, it seems, the best way to solve a problem isn't to eliminate it, it's to help it become something new entirely. The galactic laughter had stopped, but a new sound was starting, the sound of hope, echoing across all 7 dimensions of space. The days following what became known as the dimensional convergence were filled with a flurry of activity and revelation. Sarah spent hours interfacing with the consciousness, learning the true history of our universe through the accumulated memories of the precursors. The council chambers, once filled with dismissive laughter, now buzzed with excitement as species from across the galaxy came to study the unprecedented fusion of human innovation and ancient wisdom. The breakthrough had changed permanently, its hull now a living testament to what happens when human creativity meets cosmic knowledge. Sarah explained how the ship had become more than just a vessel. It was now a bridge between thought and reality, a prototype for a new kind of space travel that worked with the universe's fundamental consciousness rather than just passing through it. The precursors didn't just ascend, Sarah told me during one of our quiet moments in the observation deck. Watching the transformed devourers weave new patterns into the fabric of space-time. They evolved. They realized that consciousness itself was the key to universal stability. They became the universe's nervous system, waiting for someone to come along and help it grow again. The refugee ships from the Nexus swarm had begun settling into nearby systems, bringing with them technologies and cultural perspectives that would have been lost if the devourers had succeeded. But more importantly, they brought stories of other species who had tried to fight the dimensional parasites through force alone, never considering that transformation might be more powerful than destruction. The Council underwent its own transformation. The ancient hierarchies based on technological advancement were replaced by a new understanding that different perspectives, even those deemed primitive, might hold the keys to problems that had puzzled the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Humanity's seat at the table was no longer a matter of debate. We were so focused on measuring advancement by how well species could replicate existing solutions, the Council leader admitted during the formal recognition ceremony. We never considered that true advancement might mean finding entirely new ways to approach problems. The crystalline scientist who had once dismissed our theories now worked tirelessly with human researchers to understand how our dimensional drive had accidentally created the perfect tool for universal harmony. Your species doesn't just defy expectations, he told me, his surface shimmering with excitement patterns. You rewrite them entirely. But perhaps the most profound change came in how we viewed ourselves. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, not as conquerors or even equals, but as innovators, beings whose greatest strength lay not in our technology, but in our ability to imagine impossible solutions and then make them real. Sarah returned to Earth briefly to meet with world leaders, but she couldn't stay long. The breakthrough and its crew had been changed by their experience with the consciousness. They were now part of something larger, helping to guide other species through their own encounters with the higher dimensions. The transformed devourers, once the galaxy's greatest threat, now served as guardians of the very reality they had once tried to consume. As I stand here now, watching new ships being fitted with cores based on our design, I can't help but smile at how far we've come. The laughter that once filled these chambers has been replaced by something far more valuable. Wonder. Wonder at what other impossible things might become possible when we stop trying to prove ourselves and start trying to transform our limitations into strengths. The universe, it turns out, doesn't need beings who have all the answers. It needs beings who aren't afraid to ask new questions, who see problems as opportunities for transformation rather than obstacles to overcome. That's humanity's gift to the cosmos not our technology or our power, but our endless capacity to imagine new ways forward. And somewhere out there, in the seventh dimension and beyond, a consciousness that was once our greatest mystery now watches over us all, not as a guardian or a judge, but as a partner in the greatest adventure of all, the evolution of everything we thought we knew,